It is done. Bruno Guimaraes has completed his medical, and Arsenal have their man. For years, Mikel Arteta has watched this player from a distance, wanted him, and waited. Now the waiting is over. A 4-year contract has been signed, a club record fee close to £75 million has been agreed, and the player who has spent seasons controlling midfields for Newcastle United is now walking into the Emirates Stadium wearing red. But here is what makes this moment matter so much more than a normal transfer announcement. This signing did not arrive in isolation. It landed in the same 48-hour window as a chaotic 3-1 defeat to Real Betis, a serious injury concern for a young defender, the departure of a player Arteta once called his glue man, and a swirl of transfer stories involving 4 other names that are not yet and may never be Arsenal players. So the real question tonight is not simply, did Arsenal sign a good player? The real question is, what does all of this, taken together, tell us about where this football club actually stands right now, at the start of a season where the manager himself has used the word dynasty? Let us go through it properly, piece by piece, so you understand exactly what is confirmed, what is rumour, and what it all means. Here is what was genuinely at stake in this transfer. Arsenal have just won the Premier League title. That changes everything about how a summer window is judged. A champion cannot simply strengthen. A champion has to convince a dressing room and an entire fan base that the level is going up again, not standing still. If this deal for Bruno Guimaraes had collapsed or dragged on into late August, Arsenal would have opened the defence of their title with the exact same central midfield that closed out last season. No fresh legs, no fresh voice, no fresh control in the middle of the pitch. Given the leggy, disjointed performance we just saw against Real Betis, that would have been a serious problem heading into a Premier League campaign that starts in a matter of weeks. Before we go further, if you want this level of detail on every Arsenal story, not just the headlines but what they actually mean for the club, make sure you are subscribed. This channel is built for people who want the full picture, not just the scoreline. Hit that subscribe button now, because the deep dive is where this really gets interesting. Fabrizio Romano, medical completed what was posted. Bruno Guimaraes has completed his medical at Arsenal ahead of signing a 4-year contract. Mikel Arteta has already spoken to him personally, described as excited to welcome him, with the note that Arteta has wanted Guimaraes for years. The fee is put at £75 million, with an announcement expected soon. My analysis. The detail that stands out to me here is not the medical itself. That is a formality. It is the confirmation that Arteta personally called the player before anything was made official. That is not how a club moves for a squad rotation option. That is how a manager moves for a player he sees as central to his plan. When you combine that with the reported price, you are looking at a statement of priority, not a panic buy in the final weeks of the window. Now. Arsenal, official confirmation what was posted. Bruno Guimaraes is officially an Arsenal player, having passed his medical and signed a 4-year contract. He will wear the number 39 shirt for the 2026-27 season. The line used is direct, Arteta has got his man. My analysis, the number itself is a small but telling detail. Number 39 is not a legacy midfield number at this club. It tells you nothing about squad hierarchy being handed down. What matters more is the tone of that final line. Arteta has got his man. That is not neutral transfer language. That is language confirming this was a specific, long-standing target being closed out, not a name that appeared on a list in July. Fabrizio Romano, Arteta's ambition quote. What was posted? Arteta is quoted saying the club is going to attack every trophy, calling that the ambition, and stating that all of his work through the summer has been about understanding what is needed to win again and to create what he calls a dynasty at the club. My analysis. This is the most important quote in the entire story, and I want you to sit with it for a second. A manager does not use the word dynasty casually, especially not the season immediately after winning the league. That word sets an internal standard. It tells every player in that dressing room that last season's trophy is now the floor, not the ceiling. When you place that ambition next to a leggy defeat to Real Betis just hours earlier, you start to understand why that result, on paper meaningless, will not simply be brushed aside internally. AFC stuff. Arteta dodging the question what was posted. A reporter directly asks Arteta if the Bruno Guimaraes move is confirmed. Arteta responds that he cannot talk about any news, joking that reporters are sometimes faster than him and that he does not know what is happening. Pushed further on whether the player would be a good addition, Arteta simply states that he cannot talk about any player who is not currently an Arsenal player. My analysis. This exchange happened before the official announcement, and it is a very deliberate piece of message discipline. Notice Arteta does not deny the story, and he does not confirm it either. He simply refuses to engage. That is a manager protecting a deal that is still being finalised, not a manager caught off guard. Once you compare this timestamp to the later official confirmation, the picture becomes clear. This was a deal already essentially done, just not yet ready to be said out loud in a press room. AFC stuff citing Ben Jacobs, Kenan Yildiz. What was posted? According to this update, Arsenal made an approach for Juventus forward Kenan Yildiz before the Vinicius Jr. situation developed. The player is described as one Arsenal appreciate, but given a new contract he recently signed, any move is considered unlikely, or if possible, would require an extremely high fee. My analysis: I want to be completely clear with you here. This is a rumour, and a cooling one at that. The framing itself tells you the likely outcome. A new contract almost always signals a player who is not for sale at a reasonable price. File this one under interest shown, not interest being acted upon. AFC stuff citing Ben Jacobs, Gabriel Jesus. What was posted? Interest is described from Al Ahly and Saudi Arabia in Gabriel Jesus, which would intensify if either club were to lose forward Ivan Toney. It is noted that Arteta is personally fond of Jesus, and that if it were purely the manager's decision, he would likely keep him. However, the suggestion is that a sale could happen out of necessity rather than choice. My analysis: this is a rumour, not a confirmed transfer, and I want to highlight the phrase out of necessity, because that is the key tension here. This is not a story about a player Arteta wants gone. It is a story about squad depth, other targets arriving, and financial reality potentially overriding personal preference. That is a very different and more uncomfortable situation for a manager than simply moving on a player he does not rate. AFC stuff citing Ben Jacobs, Victor Gyökeres. What was posted? The suggestion here is that if Atletico Madrid offered Julian Alvarez as part of a deal involving Victor Gyökeres, and the player himself agreed, Arsenal would not block the move. The conclusion drawn is that Gyökeres may not be fully untouchable under the right circumstances. My analysis: again, this must be treated strictly as speculation, not fact. But it is worth noting how specific the mechanism is, a swap built around a genuinely elite alternative forward, not a cash bid. That level of detail suggests smoke somewhere, even if there is no fire yet. Still, until there is an official club statement, this stays firmly in the rumour category. Connor Calafiori on Lewis Skelly. What was posted? Riccardo Calafiori discusses his on-field partnership with Miles Lewis Skelly, describing a connection built over recent days where the two do not even need to speak. They already understand each other's positioning, and he states plainly that he really enjoys playing alongside him. My analysis: in the middle of a chaotic news cycle involving one confirmed signing and 3 unconfirmed rumours, this quote is easy to overlook, but it should not be. Chemistry between a left-back and a left-sided midfielder or winger is one of the quiet foundations of a title-winning system. Calafiori confirming that understanding without needing words is a small signal of continuity heading into the new season, at a time when so much else around the squad is in flux. AFC stuff. Arteta on Christian Norgard. What was posted? Arteta pays tribute to Christian Norgard following his departure to Everton, describing him as a player who fulfilled a tremendous role, calling him the club's glue player, someone with an incredible capacity to bring people together and keep standards high. Arteta acknowledges that sustaining that role for a long period is not easy, and wishes him well. My analysis: listen closely to the language Arteta uses here: incredible capacity to bring people together. That is not a footballing compliment about passing range or tackles won, that is a dressing room compliment. Losing a player like that, even one who was not necessarily a guaranteed starter, creates a leadership gap that a transfer fee cannot fully measure. It is worth watching who steps into that connective role as the season begins. Connor Calafiori on returning players. What was posted? Calafiori addresses the fact that 9 players are still to return to the club after extended breaks, acknowledging that this will make for a tricky start to the season. He notes that every big club faces this same issue, expresses hope that those players will be well prepared, and states that with only 10 days until a competitive final, the squad needs to be ready. My analysis: this is the honest, unglamorous side of a title-winning summer. International tournaments extend a smaller group of players' seasons and shrink their pre-season preparation. 9 players is a significant number for one squad to be missing simultaneously. When you place that fact next to the sluggish performance against Real Betis, the picture becomes far less alarming and far more explainable, This was not a tactical failure. It was a squad simply not yet whole. Connor Hum, Arteta's post-match reaction. What was posted? Reacting to the defeat, Arteta states plainly that winning is the important part and that Arsenal did not manage to do that, so there is disappointment in the result. He points out that 25 players were used across the match, which needs to be factored in. He describes the first half specifically, noting a difference between how the team played and how the team competed, highlighting some strong moments defensively around their own box. He acknowledges standards were not where they usually are, notes positives to take, and closes by saying that sometimes a bad result is good for creating more fire in the belly. My analysis: this is measured, controlled communication from a manager who is not panicking. He does not hide from the 25 players used, and he does not pretend the performance was good. But the closing line about fire in the belly is deliberate messaging aimed squarely at his own dressing room, using an early setback as fuel rather than treating it as a warning sign heading into the real season. The Jamie Carragher assessment of Bruno Guimaraes. The core of this piece centres on Jamie Carragher's honest reassessment of Bruno Guimaraes. Carragher admits he previously had doubts, questioning the player's mobility and preferring a different profile of midfielder entirely. He also references a specific incident from 2024, an elbowing situation involving Jorginho, as part of the reputation this player carries. Alongside that, there is a concrete performance statistic. Guimaraes recorded more line-breaking passes per 90 minutes than any other Newcastle player last season. Here is my read on this. Carragher's doubts are actually the most useful part of this analysis, because they are not really doubts about quality, they are doubts about style. A player who slows the game down, draws fouls, and controls tempo can look frustrating in isolation. But Arsenal, under this manager, have built their entire identity around exactly that kind of control. Suffocating opponents, breaking rhythm, forcing matches to be played on Arsenal's terms rather than the opponent's terms. That is not a weakness being imported into this squad. That is a very specific tool being added to a system already built to use it. The Jorginho incident is worth acknowledging honestly rather than glossing over, because reputation matters in football, and neutral supporters do form opinions based on moments like that. But from a pure footballing analysis standpoint, the passing statistic tells a clearer story about capability than any single incident does. A player who leads his entire squad in line-breaking passes is a player who progresses the ball through pressure better than anyone else around him. That is precisely the profile a possession-based, high-control team needs sitting in front of its back line. The Real Betis defeat and the Havertz midfield question. This piece breaks down the 3-1 defeat in detail, walking through each goal, an early Betis opener, a second goal described as a genuine long-range strike, a headed reply from a corner, and a third goal stemming from a defensive error in a deep midfield position. The broader argument constructed here is that this result exposes, once again, that playing a certain forward in a deeper midfield role simply does not work, and never really has, despite that forward originally being signed with exactly that positional idea in mind. The connecting thread to the transfer news is direct, with Bruno Guimaraes joining alongside Declan Rice, Martin Zubimendi, and Miles Lewis-Skelly. There is now a genuinely deep, high-quality central midfield group, reducing any future need to reposition a natural striker into that deeper role. My analysis here focuses on the structural logic of this argument, because I think it is understated in how significant it actually is. A team's best player being miscast in the wrong position is one of the most common and costly mistakes in football, and it usually only gets fixed when a genuine alternative becomes available. What this piece is really describing is not just a bad Tuesday night result, it is describing the closing of a tactical loophole. Before this transfer window, if injuries hit the midfield, there was a real possibility of that forward being dragged backward into a role that clearly does not suit him, based on the evidence of tonight. After this transfer window, with 4 recognised central midfielders of genuine quality, that scenario becomes far less likely. In that sense, the value of signing Bruno Guimaraes is not only about what he adds going forward, it is about what he protects the team from having to do out of necessity. I also want to note the honest caveat within this analysis, the point that this same kind of sluggish pre-season display happened at a similar point last year, before form was found within a game or two, once the season proper began. That context matters enormously. It would be a mistake to treat one flat pre-season friendly, played with 25 players rotated in and out, as a genuine tactical crisis. The lesson from this result is specific and narrow, that one positional experiment should not be repeated, not that the entire squad is short of form heading into the season. The full Arteta press conference. This piece is the most information-dense of the 3, and it needs to be broken into its component parts, because several separate story threads run through it simultaneously. First, on the result itself, Arteta's tone matches what we already covered in his post-match soundbite. Measured, contextual, not alarmed, pointing to the 25 players used and drawing a line between how the team played versus how it competed. Second, on Bruno Guimaraes, this press conference captures the exact moment before confirmation, with Arteta repeatedly declining to discuss any player not yet officially at the club, even when pressed directly on how much of a boost such a signing would represent. That refusal, now that we know the deal was completed within the following day, reads very differently in hindsight than it would have read live in the room. It was not evasiveness born of uncertainty, it was discipline around an almost finished deal. Third, and this is a detail that deserves far more attention than it typically receives, there is a note buried within this piece regarding Vinicius Jr. The suggestion is that contract talks between that player and Real Madrid appear to be moving in a direction that increases the likelihood he remains at that club, which is described as something of a blow to any Arsenal interest in that direction. I want to be precise here, this is not framed as a confirmed transfer pursuit falling through, it is framed as a shifting probability. But it is a meaningful data point, because it tells you that at least one high-profile forward target appears to be moving away from Arsenal's reach at the same time Bruno Guimaraes is moving toward it. Ambition in one area of the pitch, resistance in another. Fourth, the piece includes Arteta's praise for a young player breaking through, describing him as mature, focused, and possessing tremendous natural quality. Development stories like this rarely make headlines next to a £75 million transfer, but they matter for squad building, because internal pathway players reduce the long-term need for external spending at certain positions. Fifth, and this is the part that deserves genuine sensitivity, there is an update on a serious injury to a player named Lewis Copley. Arteta's own words here are notably cautious, stating that the situation does not look good, that the injury mechanism itself is not particularly positive, nor are the symptoms already present, with a clearer update expected the following day. I will not speculate beyond what was actually said. What I will say is that this stands as a sobering reminder within an otherwise celebratory week. A reminder that a football club's fortunes are never only measured in transfer fees and press conference soundbites, but also in moments like this one, which affect a young player's actual well-being. Finally, this piece closes with Arteta's tribute to Christian Norgard, language we already broke down earlier, describing him as a player capable of holding a dressing room together. Taking all 5 threads together, what this press conference really shows is a club managing several simultaneous realities at once. An incoming marquee signing being protected from premature confirmation, a competitive result being contextualized honestly, a departing player being honored properly, a young talent being encouraged publicly, and a serious injury being handled with appropriate caution rather than speculation. Putting the pieces together. Before we close, I want to step back and connect these separate threads because on their own, each one is just a headline. But together they form a much more complete story about where this club is right now. Start with the timing. The Bruno Guimaraes deal did not land on a quiet news day. It landed directly alongside a defeat, an injury concern, and a departure. That is not unusual for a football club in late summer. Transfer business rarely pauses for a friendly fixture. But it does mean that judging any single piece of news in isolation would give you a distorted picture. A club that loses 3-1 to Real Betis on the same day it completes a £75 million signing is not a club in crisis, and it is not a club coasting either. It is a club running several processes at once, the way every serious title contender does in August. Then consider the personnel logic running underneath all of it. Arsenal are simultaneously adding a controlling midfield presence in Bruno Guimaraes, protecting their most reliable centre-forward from ever being miscast in midfield again, managing genuine interest in 3 attacking players who may or may not arrive, and potentially losing a forward to Saudi interest depending on how other dominoes fall elsewhere. None of those threads exist independently. If Gabriel Jesus were to leave, for instance, the calculus around any incoming forward changes immediately. If Kenan Yildiz's new contract holds firm, as the reporting suggests it likely will, that removes one option from consideration entirely. This is squad building as a genuinely interconnected system, not a series of unrelated transfer stories. And then there is the human side, which is easy to lose inside transfer fee numbers and shirt number announcements. A departing player being thanked personally and specifically for his character rather than only his output. A young academy talent being praised in the same breath as a £75 million arrival. And a serious injury update delivered with genuine caution rather than false reassurance. Those moments do not move markets or headlines the way a Fabrizio Romano post does. But they tell you a great deal about the internal culture Arteta has been building. The same culture that produced the word he chose to describe his ambition this summer. Dynasty. What to watch next? Going forward, there are a small number of specific things worth tracking closely, rather than getting distracted by every fresh rumour that appears. First, watch how quickly Bruno Guimaraes is integrated into the starting midfield once the 9 returning players are back and fully fit. A 4-year contract signals long-term planning, but the short-term question is how fast he becomes first choice alongside Declan Rice and Martin Zubimendi. Second, watch the Gabriel Jesus situation specifically, because that is the rumour with the clearest stated mechanism behind it, interest tied directly to what happens with Ivan Toney elsewhere. If that domino falls, we will know quickly. Third, watch for further updates on Louis Copley's injury. Arteta's own words were carefully measured, and until a clearer diagnosis is confirmed, that situation deserves patience rather than speculation from anyone covering this club, myself included. Fourth, watch how the profile of Kai Havertz is used in the opening weeks of the Premier League season. If the logic laid out around this squad holds, he should not appear in a deep midfield role again this season, and that will be one of the clearest signs that lessons from this pre-season have actually been applied. So where does that leave Arsenal right now, at this exact moment in the summer? One genuinely significant signing is confirmed, completed, and already being framed internally as central to the manager's long-term plan. One pre-season result exposed a specific fixable tactical flaw rather than a deep structural problem. One departure was honoured with real warmth. 3 separate transfer stories remain firmly in rumour territory, ranging from unlikely to genuinely uncertain. One young player's injury situation remains a real concern heading into the following day's update. And beneath almost all of it sits a squad that is still, quite literally, waiting for 9 of its players to walk back through the door. That is the full picture, not the headline version, the actual picture. If you want this same level of depth on every major Arsenal story this season, subscribe now, because we are only just getting started.